Hello, everyone. This is Doug Campbell-John, and this week on Revenue Renegades, I'm incredibly excited to welcome old friend Max Altschuler, the founder and general partner from GTMfund. Welcome, Max.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I always start these things off with founding stories because we're both founders. You had founded a company, got acquired by Outreach, done a bunch of angel investments, and now suddenly you're on the other side of the table being a VC. So tell me a little bit about how GTMfund came about.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. So I started my career at a company called Udemy, online education marketplace, led the sales and supply side, the instructor side of that platform. And we did some really hacky stuff to grow the instructor side of that business very quickly. And other VCs and founders would ask our VCs and founders what we were doing to grow so quickly. And I started to talk to a lot of them, tell them, hey, we're scraping leads lists using Python and Phantom JS, and we're hiring virtual assistants in the Philippines who are usually acting as, admins or data entry to do SDR work for us, or we're using early sales engagement platforms like ToutApp at the time.
Yep.
Before there was really anything else, it was like ToutApp and Yesware. Inside Sales was a power dialer then, like Outreach and Sales didn't exist, and doing some hacky stuff. So that turned into a media company called Sales Hacker that I ran for 5 years. And we did conferences, we did webinars, we did online publication, some consulting and training in there. And then we also ran the SaaStr annual for Jason Lemkin. He was a speaker at my first conference, and he came to me a year later. He had a Quora and a blog called SaaStr on all things SaaS. And he said, hey, can you help? I want to do a conference too. So we did that for the first 2 years. And through that, just built an amazing network of VP, C-level, sales, marketing, customer success leaders, also CEOs, VCs, you name it. And didn't put to good use till a few years later. So this is important. So we had a great cash flowing business, but not a high upside business. Meaning, I watched all my friends around me have these SaaS companies where they had, 20x multiples on revenue that they were raising at or selling at. But for a media company, you're getting a very small multiple on revenue and probably a multiple on EBITDA. And so my way of diversifying was by investing in early stage SaaS companies. And my first investment I ever made was into Outreach. I met Manny. This was around the time where SalesLoft was starting to pivot from prospector into kind of emailing and sales engagement. ToutApp was up and running, but kind of refused to get into sequences. Or cadences, whatever you want to call it. Yesware was also kind of in that race, but hadn't jumped into that yet either. It was kind of all one-off email automation. And I met Manny in Union Square and just hit it off. I really liked their approach. They were very product-centric, customer-centric. They were doing a lot of like, all right, you can sign up for this, but we're going to watch every move you make on the platform and understand how you use this product. And I love their approach, but I also loved Manny's just overall attitude. Bull in a china shop. Like this person was just going to be successful no matter what. They were going to will it into existence. And I called my dad, who is a financial advisor, was my financial advisor at the time, and I just become an accredited investor, and said, hey, I'm going to write my first angel check. And he's like, that's a terrible idea. Those things are all losers. It's, it's just like you're losing your money. What are you doing? You don't have a lot to begin with. And on that call, I said to him, I was like, hey, all right, I understand all that. Yes, I'm probably going to lose my money. But two things, like one, I know the space really better than anybody else on the planet. I've been in it. I have a media company in it. I wrote a book, Hacking Sales, on it. Like, will you agree with that? And he was like, yeah. Okay, tracks. I was like, okay. Two, I think I'm a pretty good judge of character. Like, I don't really need to back that up, but like, would you agree with that? He was like, yeah, that I would agree with. So, okay, well, I think Manny's going to do a great job. I like this business. I like the way he's approaching it. By the end of the phone call, he was like, okay, I'll match whatever you put in.
Nice.
And so he actually made a lot of money on that investment because that was like a $3 million valuation in 2015. So we did really well there. And then I was also early in Gong, Drift, Bombora, Carbon Health, a couple other really good ones. So anyway, long story short, started my investor career as an angel while I was doing that. Funny thing is, a lot of the speakers at my events, people would become friends of mine, sponsors, attendees, were all these CROs, CMOs, and they wanted to diversify too. So if you had two people were the head of sales, heads of sales in Salesforce in 2012, and one went to go be the head of sales at Achievers, and the other one went to go be the head of sales of Zoom. 4 years later, one makes $50 million in an IPO, and the other one makes nothing when they get acquired by like private equity firm. And the person who was at Achievers could have been actually better at their job than the other one. They picked the wrong opportunity. And when you're, in that role, a lot of your compensation is the equity that you get in that upside. So I kind of put that idea in my back pocket. Fast forward, coincidentally sold Sales Hacker to Outreach, ran marketing at Outreach, 25 million to 250 million in ARR, and started the fund 2021 when I was trying to figure out, well, I'm not going to retire. Sounds boring. Like, what do I want to do next? And pulled that idea out of my back pocket because AngelList had just come out with rolling funds, which allowed anyone to kind of raise and deploy capital, democratizing venture capital, so to speak. So we said, okay, let's call it GTMfund. We're specialized in all things go to market. What if my hypothesis is, what if I raised $1 million from 20 to 50 of my GTM leader friends, put that into 10 companies and could positively affect the outcome of those companies? And it went gangbusters. We ended up raising 22 million in 2021, 2022 from about 250 go-to-market leaders. And then we launched our first institutional fund, our first standard fund in 2023. We raised 54 million on a target of 50, so oversubscribed that. We got about 300 plus go-to-market leaders now in the network, and the fund is doing exceptionally well. And so, yeah, the proof of concept is there. People want the go-to-market help. I think you're seeing with, the whole vibe coding era that we're in right now, that technology is getting easier and easier to build than ever before, and go-to-market might be the last true moat. So companies need what we're offering, and we're able to do it in a very, I'd say, scalable manner because of our backgrounds as tech operators. So we actually just got done building our own internal AI tool that essentially has like all of our LP information, we have like, we sign up a go-to-market leader as an LP, they fill out a preference card, and we have a ton of information on the LP, both like their jobs to be done, what they're good at, where they're specialists, also like their career. We also have their, information from across the web. And then we also have our media entity. So when we have a portfolio company that says, hey, I need help with sales compensation planning, we're able to go into our own tool and it'll highlight all of the LPs that we have that can help with sales compensation planning. And then also all the stuff across our media entities that include sales compensation planning, and then the links to those, initiatives or assets. So it's pretty cool. It's just like our
That's
way
awesome.
to scale our own internal support to another level. It also helps us with winning deals, and also helps us with diligence. So it's a pretty versatile machine we built there.
When do I get access to that, Max?
That's an internal tool only. When well, actually, so because you're a founder in the fund, you let us know what you need help with. Obviously, we'll pull the cords on the machine.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think, as both an investor and a recipient of GTM Fund funds, full disclosure for everyone up front, one of the things that really I didn't expect was such a pleasant surprise about the fund is how active that community of kind of the operator community is, and the Slack workspace. I've talked to Sam Jacobs and others about this. It's like it is truly one of the most amazing value adds that I didn't realize was going to be there until I experienced it.
Yeah, that's probably the number one question we get from the big institutions when they invest in the fund is like, can you scale this?
Mhm. Yeah.
And like, what it was the operation like? How do you okay, you have this community, like how do you operationalize that? And for us, we take a lot of pride in that. I mean, I think that is where being former operators in VC comes into, be somewhat of a unfair advantage for us, because like we're like used to building these scalable processes inside of organizations. And now with AI, I mean, that's one of the first things we did. I mean, Writer was an early investment for us. So like we were on this AI train, I'd say very early. And in February, we did like a mini hackathon inside the fund just to further kind of say, okay, like let's detail every process we can that could potentially be replaced by some version of AI. And there's no stupid ideas. And so just like throw it all in. And so we're going through that now. And, as you do that type of exercise, there'll be things like, okay, great. Like this already exists. There's an out of the box solution. Let's go buy this SaaS product. And then like this stuff over here, this doesn't already exist. Let's go build it for ourselves. And I've showed this to some of our institutional LPs. They're like, can you commercialize this and like start a like spin off a company? And I'm like, I'd rather use it to make us a bunch of money on the fund, and and maybe but later for sure. So right now we're focused all hands on deck on just doing the best we can out of the 54 million that we're deploying.
And I think it's a great distinction to point out, because I mean, I think sometimes people get confused with the name of the fund, GTM fund, that you only invest in go-to-market companies. Can you just talk a little bit about the investment theses you had?
Yeah, it certainly is something that we address once in a while, I'd say. So go-to-market fund means we are here to help companies with go-to-market. We don't just invest in companies, go-to-market companies. Actually, I wouldn't say we don't invest in go-to-market companies, but they're much fewer and further between. We're re-underwriting our thesis and coming with a prepared mind into a lot of the deals that we do. I'd say we do that underwriting anywhere between quarterly and twice a year, whatnot. And what we're looking for is, we like the surfer analogy, which is you can have the best surfer in the world, which is the founder. You can have the best board in the world, which is the product. But if you don't have a wave, you can't surf. You're not going anywhere. So for us, we're always looking for like, what is that inflection point, or what is that tailwind that's happening that we can get behind, and then go find, an exceptional founder in that space. Go find, somebody building that, next best exceptional product in that space. And so, that could be, a 500 billion that's in a bill that is for, road safety. And, if we find that first and we know about that, and we can say, okay, well, there's going to be a lot of money flowing into those types of companies, we can go in and say, okay, what's the future of that look like? That could be maybe the government or the individual companies are saying, we're not going to allow pixel tracking anymore. All right, well, marketers need to understand attribution. Who's going to build for that? Who's going to build the replacement for pixel tracking? That's an inflection point. Inflection points could be cultural, generational, technological, economic, political, you name it. And so we're always looking to kind of re-underwrite based on like, what are the areas that we should be investing in based on where the world is going, and what do we think is going to sustain into the future. Now, if you had done this exercise in 2021, there are a lot of things that I think were trending at that time that would have been good investments for that year, but not good investments 3 or 5 years later, right? Like there's so many things that got funded that were just like, we're going to hammer DEI. And then DEI got kind of thrown out the window, 2 or 3 years later. Those investments, are now up shit's creek, right? So, that gets very tough. You have to have a little bit of a crystal ball, and you have to see the current time very clearly in order to understand, where that we're going in the future. So right now, the buckets I'd say are vertical SaaS, is really big for us. I think there's a lot of untouched industries from tech that not even just like now we're in this AI wave. Before that was SaaS. Before that was like what, web like 2.0, whatever you want to call it. Like I think a lot of these industries are still stuck even beyond that. Just super manual data entry, logging things on paper. If you're looking at shipping, logistics, trucking, freight, you name it, super outdated interests. Farming, agriculture. We're in a company called CISO Labor that automates H-2A visas for farm workers, and like, holy shit, they're stuck in the Stone Age. So verticals. Second thing is like AI infrastructure and dev tooling. So Writer is big on that. Paid, Manny's new company, Paid.ai is another one there. And then global infrastructure is probably a third bucket, where, we're in a company called Control Rooms that does sensors for nuclear power plants and petrochemicals. We're in a company that Armada Systems that does containerized data centers. So, you could put them on an oil rig in the middle of the ocean, or, an army base in the middle of Africa, you name it. That in the past, again, inflection point for this. In the past, those areas haven't had access to Wi-Fi.
Right.
They can't have internet. Now you have Starlink, which covers the 70% of the Earth's surface in Wi-Fi that didn't previously have Wi-Fi. So what is enabled by that? If you understand that and come to invest with like that mindset, where it's like, okay, this big shift just happened. What does that enable? That opens your eyes to a lot of potentially groundbreaking new technology. So, yeah, GTM stuff, fewer and further between for sure. HR tech, same thing. Tech for the CFO, same thing. But more vertical, AI infrastructure, dev tooling, and global.
Got it. And what are some of the common mistakes you see when you look at kind of go-to-market motions? What are you seeing some of the biggest mistakes you see startups make?
Not properly understanding their ideal customer, not properly understanding how to segment accounts and territories, not knowing how to, the biggest one is like not knowing how to approach customers. It's one of the things we're working on at Operator, but I still think like messaging is a mess across the board. It has been for a very long time. It's just like a funny theme that I've seen over my career, even especially like coming out of outreach. We just spend so much time in in outbound, just on this like contact data to enrichment to like segmenting all this stuff. And it's almost like the process from when you figure out who you want to reach out to like the actual outreach process. And then like if you had this like meme or image, it would almost be like somebody with like beakers and Nikola Tesla or whatever it is, and they're just like doing all this like math and sciences on the entire process. And then you get to like the point where you send the message out, and it's like a kid like learning his ABCs. It's like, what are we doing here? Like how is this the part where you've spent almost no time? And so it's either like kick to an SDR who's like in their first job out of college, and it's like, hey, you figure it out. Or now it's AI Mad Libs, where it's like if then statements. So you're using some sort of AI SDR or something else that's like first name, pull something from their LinkedIn that you see as personal, second sentence about their business, third sentence about our business, fourth sentence salutations. And then you end up with this email that goes out that's like, I see you went to Duke. Go Blue Devils. Congratulations on being the part of the 50 entrepreneur awards, whatever program. Did you know that our company does X, Y, and Z? Would love to schedule a call. How does Tuesday at 3 p.m. work? Like, what are we even doing here? Like
Right.
that. It's
Right.
it's so
I remember
broken.
all those. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny, like Jason Lemkin posted about this the other day. He's like, usually when an SDR emailed me in the past, I would just ignore it. And now when I know it's AI, I block and like report as spam. And he's like, I used to feel bad because it was a human on the other side, but now I don't because it's AI and it's bullshit. And I was like, yeah, it's so true. I mean, there's like, it's a massive detriment to your organization to send those out, and they're not any good. And so like, I just think there hasn't been a lot of attention paid to the actual message for a very long time, and
Yep.
something that operators are working on, but it's still a massive miss whether you're using, some level of automation to do that, or you're just kicking it to your kind of most junior employees to do it.
So let's talk a little bit. You mentioned kind of it all starts with ICP. Who's your ideal customer profile? So if you take somebody like Operator, and for those of you who don't know, Operator was one of the first companies or the first company that was kind of incubated within GTMfund. We had Mark on the show earlier. He was talking a little bit more about the capabilities of that. So we've got a full episode on Operator. But like, how do you think about defining the ICP? Because so many tech companies are like, oh, well, it's all my buddies here in Silicon Valley. It's all B2B SaaS companies. And so, if you're Sales Loft or Outreach or Operator or Gong or, fill in the blank, do you just start with all the same thing? Or how do you figure out like we're going to zig when everybody else is zagging?
I think that, and this is maybe controversial and new, but I think the traditional way of thinking about this is like, all right, you get your first 10 customers, you get your first 20 customers, you get your first 50 customers, you figure out what attributes they all have in common, and then you say, okay, that's our ICP. Or you say like, okay, we service companies that are, built on top of Salesforce and on top of Gmail, like that's our ICP. And that's the old way of doing things.
Mhm.
I think signals worked. That's the old way of doing things. It was funny, like when I first started doing all this hacky stuff and road hacking sales back in 2015, a lot of people weren't messing around with signals. And so if a company raised a Series B, it was hard. It was hard to figure out who to reach out to, how to reach out to them, all that kind of stuff. So old process, company raises a Series B. I find the TechCrunch article. I go on Crunchbase. I figure out who in their investors are. I figure out if there are any common folks that I can get an intro to through to the right person. I figure I go on LinkedIn. Who's their VP of sales? Because I'm selling into their sales org. I reach out to that VP of sales. I find their email address somewhere. Because again, it was harder back then. Maybe I get an intro through one of my VCs. I say, hey, congrats on the Series B. We know that they just checked budget on the Bant chart, right? They raised a bunch of money. And if you're one of the 2 emails that person gets to congratulate them on the Series B, they're probably going to take your call and you're probably going to be able to pitch them. Now, ZoomInfo has 37,000 customers that they advertise on their website. I think 6sense has 6,000, maybe a lot more. I don't know. But if everybody's getting the same signals at the same time and then there's 600 companies reaching out to that VP of sales that says, hey, congrats on the Series B with a barely same message, it's probably not going to work. It's a lot of noise. And so there are other ways to use 6sense and ZoomInfo, and I got nothing against those companies, but that gets really tough. And so I think the old way of doing territories, the old way of doing signals is probably on the way out the door. And if you're fully embracing AI, then you can now consume and parse information at a level you couldn't previously. So instead of saying hey, I'm going to plug in, our ICP is now companies that use this platform or whatnot, or those types of signals. What if you just said show me every company that's talking about X, in one area of their business, whether it's on an earnings call, whether it's on a CEO blog post or a company blog post, whether it's CEO's social media, all these things. You can actually aggregate all the content that company's ever put out and start searching for keywords and then create ideal customer profiles based off those keywords. And if you think about it, you're actually starting, if you created the best possible email for me to reach out to you to sell you my services, and it was somewhat explaining what we did and what problems you would have as a company that would match what we did to make us a great fit. If you started with that and created the ICP out of that, that would be a much better ICP. And now for the first time ever, you can do that because of AI. It's better than a human could ever pull that information together. So I think that's where we're going. I think that's the intention for Operator in a sense, is that you're essentially pulling the ICP together from people who need your product now.
Yep.
And you know that versus these speculative, well, they use this and they use this, so they match what we've seen before, right?
Yep. Which sounds like a much more dynamic way of saying it's not like we target companies in B2B SaaS companies in North America that have 50 to 500 employees that use Salesforce and HubSpot and, fill in the Mad Lib. It's more hey, there's this dynamic search that's still going about who is my ICP? And it could be very diverse, industries and company sizes, but are talking about things that are relevant to your offering and then able to go deliver them a very highly tailored message.
Yeah, your ICP actually ends up being the people who have this problem and want to solve it this way. And now for the first time ever, we can index for that.
Yep.
Versus in the past, you couldn't. You couldn't just say that's going to be our ICP 7 years ago, because you had no way of figuring that out without starting with a building block well before that, a hypothesis well before that. Okay, in the past, you'd say that, and then you'd be okay, well, what do those companies look like? Because we need something that's searchable. This wasn't searchable. Now it is.
Yeah.
So I think it's completely changed. I actually think what I like about Operator that I think is literally flipping the game on the head is what if you created your ICP by creating the message first and then working backwards, and then you basically went message, accounts, ICP, contact data, right? That's the way you did it instead of the opposite.
Yep. So let's shift gears for a little bit. Tell me a little bit about obviously between 2021 and now, a lot of things have changed in the funding environment. Tell me where you think we are now and kind of, what advice would you give founders who are trying to navigate today's funding environment?
I think the seed is probably as easy, if not easier, than it's ever been. I think there's a lot of money floating around that wants to get in early. I think, the power law is we get paid if we have one great one phenomenal company and everything else doesn't work, right? So like, it's just how VC works, is to spread it around, especially at the early stages. We don't necessarily see it like that for our model because we're a complementary fund versus, we're leading rounds. So for us,
Mhm.
like every deal we do, we want to make sure is exceptional and we don't have to lead. So we're actually able to get into more exceptional businesses. It's a little different, but I think the A and beyond is harder. Like the metrics that you have to have after, like, seed is, hey, here's the story, here's our background, take a chance on us. A is like, all right, how did it go? You
Yep.
had a story.
Yep.
You sold us that story. 0 to 1 in how long? 0 to 3, 0 to 5. Like what? Like how fast are you growing? And it's less about like what ARR you're at, more about what that growth rate is and how reliable that growth is, how reliable that revenue is. One of the things we're seeing right now is, there's a lot of people coining the term. I think it's like ERR. It's like experimental revenue, where it's not really ARR because you got people that are coming in, they're trying out the new AI stuff.
Mhm.
And it's like, are they going to stick? Are they going to be there for the long term? Is this really ARR, or is this somebody who's like, oh, I'll give an AI SDR a try. I'll give this a try, like, and then they try it. They're like, okay, we're not going to renew. And then if you're a VC and you invest in a company that's going, 0 to 10 million and, lightning speed, but it's a massive leaky bucket, that's not going to be great for anybody involved, right? So yeah, it's I think the A and beyond is tougher, but there's a lot of deals being done still, and there's a lot of technology that needs to be built. I think the most interesting thing for me is the tech cycles are speeding up in ways that are going to make traditional VC harder and potentially impossible to do. Maybe 7 years ago, 2018 and before, there were 7 to 10 year cycles. And so you invest in a company, that company matures, that company eventually IPOs or gets to 200 million, gets acquired, whatever it is, you get liquidity out of that company, and then you go invest in that company's new competitor that comes out 10 years later. And you know that space really well. You've already taken your money out of that business. It's already a big company. They don't need your money anymore. They don't need your help anymore anyway, right? And now those cycles are as little as 3 years. So what happens if in, fund 3, you want to invest in this really awesome what do you do if you're Meritech or Meritech did this? What do you do if you're Meritech? You invested in Outreach's series whatever at $1 billion valuation. You thought by now you'd have your money back out of Outreach.
Right.
Now you're seeing companies that you have to invest in that are competitive potentially to Outreach. I mean, they just did Clay's last 2 rounds. And so now they have like a fund from 1 or 2 funds ago that's in Outreach. They haven't seen liquidity on that investment yet. They're in a new fund that is investing in Clay that is technically like going to steal market share from Outreach in one way or another.
Right.
So what do you do? Like that wasn't a thing as much as it is today 7 years ago. And so you have like a winner from this fund and you want to create a winner from this fund, but the liquidity hasn't happened in 2021 to 2025. So we've had 4 years, 22 to 25, so 3-4 years almost off of liquidity. And on top of that, the tech cycles are shortening. So it'll be interesting to see how that changes venture capital. I think it's going to change it in a material way. I think vintages time might shorten, which means like, right now you have a 3-year deployment cycle per fund. Maybe that becomes a 1-year deployment cycle per fund, or it makes it tougher to deploy capital.
Well, I think and you have a couple other things to layer on top of that. One of which is it is seemingly easier to go. I mean, GTM may still be the holdout on this, but it's certainly you can do a lot more with smaller teams.
Yep.
And you also have a much higher bar for IPO than you did.
Yep.
Right.
And as early investors, we like that. Like I love raise 2 rounds and then don't raise anymore. And we'll come in one of those 2 rounds. And then I don't think you need any more money because these things, it's not growth at all costs anymore. And that was the whole concept behind Paid. It's one of the things actually we raised money off of. It's in a slide, but it's like, the beasts, the samsaras of this run, they IPO'd and let's say they had 3,000 employees and 300 million in revenue, right? Like now you're going to see, 300 employees and 300 million, or 30 employees and 300 million in ARR. And what does that do? Well, you don't need much. You don't need all this growth capital. So what happens to these funds that are, $10 billion funds that are supposed to put all that money to work? Like, it might get a lot harder, or it might be used for secondaries earlier to let companies stay public longer. Like, they'll change the dynamic quite a bit, which it already is. I
Yeah.
mean, look at Databricks. Like, they're just content to stay private because they're raising money so easily on the private markets whenever they need it, and they can
And
still
you
make
just have liquidity,
acquisitions.
liquidity employees, liquidity investors, and everybody
Yeah.
stays happy, and you don't have the pressure of being public. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And so that's how that money gets put to work. But then those companies are not really growth investors anymore. It's just the private equity.
Right.
It just changes the dynamic.
Yeah. I know we've got I have a ton of things I could ask you, Max. We could keep talking for a long time, but let me just talk a little bit about shifting to you. You made a kind of an interesting life change. You talked about recently from having very successful early, relatively speaking, in your career, success, kind of building up the American dream, checklist, and you just shifted all that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. We talked about it a little bit before we started recording, but we, when I did a lot of secondary from outreach over the years. I did fairly well at a young age. And when you're young, I have 3 kids, you kind of listen to a lot of these shoulds. You should do this, you should do that. When you make money, you get a house, you buy the dirt, you build the house, you stay there for 20 years, whatever it is, 30 years, your kids have kids, they come there. And that sounded really nice to me. I was all in on the should wagon for that. And we did it, and we bought it, and I had the nice cars, I had the golf club membership, all the other stuff. And our family dynamic we didn't enjoy it. It wasn't for us. I got really sick in December, lost 27 pounds, was in and out of the hospital, almost died. And it was kind of like one of those awakening moments where it's like, hey, screw all these shoulds. Like, what's in your heart? What does your family want? And where do you think you can be the best you? And for me, the best me is a great father and husband, physically and mentally healthy, emotionally, spiritually as well. And my clearest thinking happens. My best leadership, everything around, from the fun standpoint. And we spend a lot of time in Sedona every year. And every year, that's where our family dynamic is the best. I'm personally the healthiest and fittest I ever am. And I incubated a company from up there. We did this AI stuff from up there. Like, a lot of my clarity comes from being in nature. And so instead of, being in kind of the city and having all the big stuff and fancy stuff, we decided to sell everything and then just go be in nature in places that we feel called to be in during that period of time. And we homeschool our kids and probably will for the next 3 to 5 years. So it gives us an opportunity to do that. And I can get on a plane. I already do get on a plane, anywhere between 1 and 3 times a month to go do things for the fund. But it's really been a nice unlock for us. And so we're in Anna Maria Island, Florida right now for April and May. And then we're out in Mattituck, which is around the Hamptons in New York through summer. And then we'll be in the Marin, like Stinson Beach area, September, October, November. And so it's nice because while I'm in, especially Mattituck, I can get to New York City very easily. When we're in Marin, we get to San Francisco very easily. So there's still the work stuff obviously mixed in there with the visits we have to make, and it makes things easier. But I'll tell you, being here, being present with family, being present when I'm working in an atmosphere where I feel creative and connected to my passion and everything else, it's a game changer. You really get so much more juice for the squeeze on everything that you're doing.
I love it. I love it. I'm so happy for you, my friend, because I think that one of the benefits that we all got out of COVID in some ways was just kind of changing the entire world's attitudes about, well, maybe not the entire world, a lot of the world around remote work and kind of the fact that you can do it. And I'm still a huge believer in face to face as well, but I think that blending and that flexibility is something that didn't feel like a possibility for a lot of people, a decade ago. Right? So I love it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm an anti-Zoom guy. Don't tell them, but I like the phone. Yeah, let me plug in my headphones. I'm still wired. I get these on like Alibaba now because they don't sell them anymore. But I won't do the like EMF robot things. But I just walk around, I'll walk on the beach, I'll go on a hike or something like that. I'll take calls, and like I feel so much more engaged in the conversation when I'm walking and talking
Yeah.
than if you're like you're staring at somebody through a screen, you get a little notification, all these other things going on. Like I really will only do screens unless it's absolutely necessary. And then from like a meeting in person standpoint, like we haven't ever seen it affect any deals that we do, but it is super helpful for fundraising. So there is some seasonality to getting on planes for us, which is like if I need to go get a $2 million plus check from somebody to raise, capital for GTMfund, you got to get on a plane. But to be a lead investor on a deal, like absolutely don't need to. The founder doesn't care. Like they just want the best investor. So certainly hasn't affected that part of the job. And I'd say every week, at least one of us is on a plane at the fund. Oftentimes all of us.
So a few questions to wrap up. If you could kind of automate one task in your life forever with AI, what would it be?
Doing the dishes. I hate doing the dishes.
So
My God.
you want
Pain in my
Elon's robots in your house, just kind of, pulling stuff out of the sink and putting them in there.
Yeah, like a golf round that is longer than 4.5 hours, doing the dishes, mainly those things, Zooms, doing the dishes, I'd probably put that up there. My wife would too. Both of us hate doing the dishes.
Fair enough. Fair enough. What's something you're passionate about that might surprise people?
I think I'm pretty spiritual and pretty hippie,
Hmm.
which is my wife always says, like, if people knew this side, like, I don't think like in your entire life, which is like mostly work, knows this side of you at all. But we had a home birth for our kids, and like we're try to get as much of our grocery stuff from like local farmers as possible. We're, like I said before, like I don't do a lot of EMF stuff. Like we turn the Wi-Fi off at night when we go to sleep. I'm in a rental right now, but I carry this like grounding sheet with us that I put on the bed for like grounding at night. So I'm like very like ashwagandha and things like that. Like we're very, I'd say, more on the hippie side of things than most people would expect.
Max Altschuler, hippie capitalist. I love
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
So speaking of those things, like, and it might be one of the things you mentioned, like, what's one thing you kind of can't live without in your daily routine?
I think at this point, just like nature, being outside. I mean, I've always said I try to chase summer. Like I like sunny days. I need sunny days. I need to be able to get outside. I need warmth. So that's why we, initially moved to Arizona in the first place. It's just like you take it for granted. You actually like don't realize how sunny it is until you get on a plane and go somewhere else. And I'm like, what is this? What are those? Where's the sun?
Yeah.
I didn't realize. And then, we come here, we're in Florida, and you could be outside all the time. Like I need to be connected to nature. I need to be able to be outside. I work from this rocking chair out here on the patio all the time. Like I love that. I need it.
And finally, just how can listeners stay in touch with you and help you on GTM's mission?
Yeah, get in contact with me on LinkedIn or X. You can find me on both of those. If you're a GTM leader interested in getting involved with the fund, hit us up. If you're a founder looking to raise money, hit us up. Other VCs, we work with VCs of all stages, hit us up. Anything in between, looking for a job at a portfolio company, you name it, holler at us.
Sounds great. Well, Max, thanks so much for your time. Really love the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Doug. Always a good
All right.
time.